Okay, folks, just finishing setting up. We'll be getting started in a second. Hopefully you can hear me. Yep, you can hear. That's working. Post. Bear with me, still getting set up. One more. Excellent. And we're live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. The good news is that this time we have something a little new. Thanks to the new service I'm using for streaming videos, I can actually open things up and allow people to call in. Let me just get that number and I'll put it in the description. Leave it like that. Maybe not. Oh, that's what I want. There we go. Hey, Teresa Hall, Ghost City Pagan, welcome aboard. Glad you're joining us. So if Teresa, if you or anyone else gets the urge to call in, I just put the phone number in the description. It's 512-647-1431, 512-647-1431. But okay, let's get this show on the road now that everything's all set up and squared away. Folks, if you weren't with us last week, obviously there was no usual radio show. But there was the Wrath of Khan my very first convention that I ran myself, a virtual convention. I think it went pretty darn well. Hopefully those of you who joined us enjoyed it. If you didn't, I highly recommend you go check it out. You just go to the Wrath of Khan YouTube channel. It's completely free of charge. And I think it was pretty cool. But I was racking my brain today to try to think of a topic for tonight, and I finally thought of something I think will be sort of interesting. So I've had a bunch of guests on over the years to talk about magic, particularly my friend Arthur Moyer. And we've had a lot of good opinions on it, perspectives on it, I think. And I've had a bunch of pagans on the show, but I don't think I've ever really given my thoughts on the subject of the practice of magic. So I thought I'd do a show and talk a little bit about, from a historical perspective, what I think is kind of the evolution of magical practice, what I think of my thoughts on the subject. And for those of you who aren't Christians who are thinking, oh God, he's going to give us a magic is evil speech. No. Let's clear that right up from the beginning. I don't believe that practicing magic in and of itself is evil. I don't think it's necessarily good either. I very much at this point in my life tend to think the good or evil of magic is very much dependent on what you do with it and to some extent how you do it. I don't believe you can get good results by summoning demons. For example, I think that's an inherently wrong act because you're bringing something evil into the world and giving it a foothold. That said, not all magic involves spirits. As Arthur has often commented when I've had him on, the magic that he does doesn't require summoning spirits and working through spirits and things of that nature. That's I remember particularly the priest that I worked with before he passed away was always very confused by that idea, because he always assumed, oh, you're practicing magic. Well, what spirits are you using? It's like, not. He's not. It's like, wait, what? But even if you are working with spirits, though, not all spirits are evil or malevolent. Again, I think a lot of the times you want to judge if what somebody's doing magic. If you're going to judge it, judge them by what they're doing with it. It's like a gun, I think, is a fair analogy. You can use a gun to kill innocent people. You can use a gun to hunt for food. You can use a gun, or a better analogy might be a knife. You use a knife to stab somebody to death, which is an inherently evil action. But you can also use a knife to, cut your steak. You can use a knife as a tool when you're working on, if you need to cut a rope or something while you're building something. Knives are not inherently good or evil. It's what you do with them. And I think a lot of magic isn't inherently good or evil. It's what you want to do with it. And historically, that's the interesting thing. Is historically, that's been the dominant view on the practice of magic and law. And I don't just mean in pre-Christian societies, although it's certainly true. For example, the Code of Hammurabi, which is often cited as the oldest human codified set of laws, which, by the way, isn't actually true. There are a couple of other written sets of laws that we have found that predate Hammurabi by a little bit, but it's the biggest, codified, organized set of laws you can point to. But the Code of Hammurabi has laws about the practice of magic. It doesn't forbid magic, but it does specify that if you cast a curse to kill someone or destroy one's crops, you can be punished for the crime that you committed using this. If you use a spell to commit a crime, you're punished for the crime just as if you had done it yourself. You see that Babylonian legal codes. You see that in a lot of ancient legal codes. For that matter, you even see that in the early part of the Middle Ages in Christian legal codes. And in fact, you see that even later in English legal code, that it isn't magic that's being punished. Even in one of the most evil books ever written, the Malleus Maleficarum, which is a whole book about how to find about the powers and abilities of witches, how to find witches, and how to torture them for information and execute them. It still specifies there's a type of magic in the world that isn't from Satan. So historically, even in the church, there's been this idea: you don't prosecute somebody just for casting a spell. Because, fun fact, and we're going to get into this as I get into some of the history with magic, the church practiced magic too. And I don't just mean in the theoristic sense that Arthur talked about, that prayer is a form of magic. I mean formal ritual magic. Often formal ritual magic that involves summoning demons. And things of that nature. Strange as that is, because there's actually an idea, bizarrely enough, believe it or not, in traditional medieval Christian theology, the idea of summoning a demon was less heretical than summoning an angel. Because it was believed that if you were a Christian who was right with God, you had authority over demons. And the Bible says you have authority over demons. But only God has authority over the angels. So for a human to say that he can command the angels, that's heresy. But you see this particularly as well in English law code. When most people think of witch trials, they think of burning somebody at the stake, which isn't actually true in general. A lot of witch trials, you were executed, then the dead body was thrown onto a funeral pot, was basically burned to ash. decapitation, strangulation, hanging, and other things of that nature. Don't get me wrong, there were times in history, and there are places in history where people were burned alive at the stake for the crime of witchcraft. But generally speaking, burning was more often reserved for heretics than witches. Because again, there was this idea that, or burning alive, correction. This idea that there was nothing wrong with practicing magic per se. You were punishing the person for the crime they committed with the spell. You cast the spell to make your crops grow faster, nobody cares. You cast the spell so that to blight the crops of your neighbor, that's a criminal offense. Just like if you went out and poured some sort of herbicide on the crops would be a crime because you're damaging somebody else's property. Killing cattle with magic is illegal. Killing people, obviously, with magic is illegal in this sense. And a lot of the time, in the earlier part of the time period, that's what they were punished for. It wasn't just for practicing magic. Later, eventually, this idea that they were worshiping Satan and had made deals with him and sold their souls starts to come in. So I don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm just saying, again, there's an evolution to this thinking. But again, I think maybe it's better to roll back a little and start with, as far as I can tell at least, where the practice of magic begins. I've seen a number of demonologists, including my own mentor, Le Gentili, and John Zaffis, who's a very well-educated, competent investigator I have a deep respect for. But I disagree with him on this point, and I'll get into why in a minute. Then we'll point to the beginning of demonology, the beginning of magic, with grimoires that were written by the Babylonians. And the grimoires of the Babylonians are a little like the laws of Hammurabi, in that it's the first time this was written down and this was documented, that people organized these ideas. It's not the first time. These ideas didn't start there. They're based on much older oral traditions. If you want to understand where magic really begins, in my opinion, and I'm surprised I don't seem to have any live viewers. That's strange. Especially because Teresa was here for a minute and now seems to have gone missing. But in figures, I do have a live viewer. Why does it say you don't have any? Is it okay? So do I have any live viewers? Because it's saying I don't in one place, but then when I went and checked it on YouTube at the actual link, now it's saying that I do it. I'm a little confused. It doesn't matter one way or the other, obviously, since this is being recorded 2 up later. I'm just curious. Okay, hello again, Teresa. So weird that you're there, but it's saying, concurrent viewers, 0. It doesn't matter. But again, if you go back to the early, look at cultures and tribal groups today that represent some of the old, that have been, they continue to practice the practices they have for thousands of years. Various tribal groups in Africa, some of the Native American religious traditions. And you'll find the practice of magic there. Usually it takes there's these ideas in magic of what's called symbolic and sympathetic magic. It's symbolic in the sense of you use a symbol of the thing that you're trying to do to cast your spell, which is particularly common in ceremonial magic, where it can get very, very elaborate. But it's part of the idea of the voodoo doll is, you make this doll and you do things to the doll that represents the person that you want to harm. And that will, that causes the harm. That also involves sympathetic magic, which I'll get to in a second. But symbolism is generally seen in even the oldest forms of magic is very important. You use the symbols get less complicated and less elaborate as time goes on, but a lot of magic in any form today or in the past deals with symbol of what you're trying to do, symbol of the forces you're trying to work with. Sympathetic is probably what a lot of people think of, particularly with curses, but it's true of all forms of magic, which is the whole, a part of something allows you to affect the whole. Like if you want another part of making voodoo doll traditionally is you need toenail clippings, fingernail clippings, something from the person you want to affect. What's interesting about this, and this is also a really good point, in my opinion, is that a lot of things that we think of as black magic, a lot of things that we think of as curses, are taking something positive and twisting it. Voodoo dolls are a perfect example of this. Everybody associate, it's right in the name. People associate voodoo dolls with voodoo. That's not where it actually comes from. It's actually a form of European witchcraft. African tribal magic does have traditions with dolls, and it's very similar. Where you make a symbol, you make a symbolic representation of the person you want to affect. And usually, you need some part of that person. Where it changes is where in a voodoo doll, you traditionally use the magic to hurt someone. In traditional African tribal magic, you're using it to help them. They're different. It's almost like acupuncture by proxy, because you stick pins in the doll in the various places on the doll that you stick the pin represent various problems, health, financial, and other problems that person's having in their life. You even traditionally will attach notes to this. And again, it's a positive thing. It's an upbeat thing. It's a thing that's designed to help people. Much later, it got turned around into this more negative connotation. Another big thing you find a lot of traditional magic that carries out pretty commonly, although it's even more so in traditional, is the job of a shaman, the job of a witch doctor, traditionally is a healer, a protector. If someone in the tribe's become cursed, if someone in the tribe has a malevolent spirit attached to them, they go to the witch doctor or the shaman to help them. This is also, by the way, one of my issues with the modern neo-pagan movement, is that they forget this role. They're trying to step into this role of the positive magical practitioner, and I have no issue with that. But they're forgetting that historically, that included not all of them. And believe me, there are plenty of them that understand this. But I've met many of them that want to reject this traditional role that those practitioners had in not just in healing and promoting growth and promoting welfare, but in actively combating negative spiritual forces as well. They want to make it all. Some pagans want to make it all about love and light and hippy dippy, happy, dappy nonsense, which isn't true from a historical perspective. And of course, is contrary to everything that I do. And that said, again, there are many, many, many pagans that know better. But historically, there is this concept, and I've touched on this before, that you have the shaman or the witch doctor, and then with respect to the Wiccans who may listen to this, there's what historically has been called a witch, which is a person who the shaman or the witch doctor is a priest position. And I'm sorry, I completely forgot the point I was getting to. One of the other big jobs, aside from being a protector and a healer, and to some extent a leader, is that shamans were given the job of being the intermediaries between humans and the spirit world. And a lot of very old, one of the oldest religious practices in the world, before monotheism, before polytheism, is what's called animism. In animism, everything has a soul, everything has a spirit. Rocks, trees, animals, mountains, rivers, lakes, all have a spirit. And it's important, particularly it's very important when you go on a hunt. You have to pay respect and homage to the spirit of the animal that you're going to kill. You have to pay respect and homage to the spirits of the land if you want to grow crops. And that was part of a shaman's job. was the go between the physical world and the spiritual world. And then on the other hand, yeah, there's this idea of people that took that power, took that energy, took this ability to do magic, and turned it to themselves, which is a lot of anthropologists today, even now, will call them witches. With respect to modern neo-pagans who aren't falling into this historical anthropological category. But certainly, I would argue that as long as there's been a practice of magic, somebody's turned it to their own ends, and not because magic is inherently evil or wicked or bad, but because of human nature, people are always going to try to turn that power to death, suffering, pain. Another real big concept you see in a lot of the early forms of magic is totem magic, which is actually a lot of probably where we get this idea of shapeshifters and werewolves and werebears and things of that nature from. You'll see it, particularly it's common in a number of African tribes, and you'll see this in a lot of tribal cultures. It was common in the Mesoamerican tribal groups. It's common among the Native Americans. It's common even now among tribes in Africa, that certain animals, mostly, although not always, animals that are associated with being great predators, wolves, bears, coyotes, leopards, lions. If you're going to go out on a hunt, you kind of wanted to try to channel or get in tune with the power of that animal. So a lot of traditional dances and magical practices revolved around that. And particularly, they would take skins of the animal they wanted to commune with and wear them to try to get in touch with this primal force that they saw in the world. And it's not a giant leap from this idea to taking on some of the attributes, taking on some of the power, to just becoming this animal that you're. So you have this idea, and it's an idea I've seen misused a lot. And this is a whole other thing I want to get into. Although I'm going to give the number out again in a second. There's this whole other idea you'll see often enough in the modern world with totem spirits of, I have a totem, of people with no Native American or other tribal heritage and no understanding of the tribes they're talking about and the traditions they're talking about. My spirit animal is this, my spirit animal is that. The thing is that people often seem to misunderstand, at least in my experience with totems, is usually you have one. And often, if my totem is bear, for example, and while I don't feel that I have a totem, if I had one, it probably would be bear, because I'm frumpy. I like to sleep, and I hate getting woken up, and I'm very protective. All traits traditionally associated with bears. I'm really, really furry. I'm mostly kidding, but again, I don't think I have a totem animal. I'm a Christian. I'm not part of a Native American tribal group or any other religion other than Christian, so it wouldn't make sense. But if your totem is bear, it isn't that you have a bear spirit animal that hangs around and follows you around. Your totem is bear, all capital letters. Your totem is coyote. Your totem is raven. These beings, in a lot of senses, take on almost a mythic quality, in that they are anthropomorphic, I guess is the best word, nearly godlike personification of the traits that we associate with that animal. It's not a coyote, it is the coyote. It is the spiritual representation of everything that makes up coyote. And of course, coyotes have specific traits associated with them. They're clever, they're cunning, they're sneaky. And of course, Coyote himself has these traits. You see that with foxes as well. In a more the way that we see foxes in folklore. Because again, the places these groups are talking about are where you see these practices today. They're not confined to them. The same practices existed in Europe if you go back far enough. And in some cases, you didn't have to go back that far. When some Viking warriors would put on the skins of bears or put on the skins of wolves. The ones that put on the bear skins were called berserkers. Berserker means bear shirt. Wolf shirt, someone who puts on a wolf skin before battle to channel the power of this animal spirit, to make them ferocious, to make them insane in battle. And before I keep going, I do want to give out the phone number again, because I am rather excited about the fact I can actually give you guys a phone number. So somebody can call in if they're so inclined. It looks like you may need a PIN as well. It's 512-647-1431. I'm going to put the PIN is a little long. So if anybody's trying to reach, you're going to need the PIN. So let me so it's 3295-641269 is the PIN. I'm going to put that in the description as well. You can find the phone number to call in the description if you are so inclined. And please consider calling in. I'd love to hear from somebody. It'd be nice to have a different perspective on this. Just for a change. And I think it's rather cool that I can open things up to having phone calls again. So I think largely that's where magic starts, is with these tribal practices. You used it. And here's another thing I think that's worth keeping in mind with a lot of the traditional practices. A lot of them probably have roots in science. One example I've seen made before is, a modern day farmer goes out to the field and spreads fertilizer. A shaman hundreds of years ago goes out at midnight and slits the throat of a black hen and spreads the blood out over the field. What's going on is essentially the same as nutrients being given to the soil. Just one has a ritual element, one does not. One is seen as magic, the other one is seen as scientific. You see this in religious practices as well, often enough. The obvious, because again, magic or religion. Well, I disagree. Respectfully disagree with Arthur and his prayers a form of magic assessment, because I see them as different. To me, at least, magic command. It is bending the energies of the universe to your will to get something done. That's not an inherently, and again, I want to be clear. I do not mean to imply that magic is a bad thing when I say that it is command. Command is not inherently evil, regardless of all the package. Oh, okay. Yeah, that would make calling in a little difficult, I suppose, Teresa. But it is not inherently evil to command. It's what you do, especially to command an impersonal energy. I guess a good example. Teresa, do you mean to keep sending that? It's like, does channeling water by making a dam, is that inherently you're commanding the water in a sense? Is that actually evil? No, it's just taking control of something. It's a sense of command and control, where prayer is supplication. It is asking a power greater than yourself to get something accomplished for you. That, and for that matter, just as command and control doesn't inherently imply something evil, asking doesn't imply something good. asking God to heal someone is, I would agree, a good action. Asking God to kill someone for you, and there are Christians that do this. Teresa's comment, she offers tobacco and sage before Dad starts planning, which is definitely a magical perspective on things. It steps back from the, my point with the blood was, there are nutrients in animal blood that actually can serve as a form of fertilizer. I'm certainly not discounting you using tobacco and sage. I'm just saying there's a scientific component to spreading something that effectively amounts to fertilizer out on the field before you plant it, whether you do it with scientific practice or whether you do it and call it a magical ritual. Certainly, that's a whole other aspect is all, and that's kind of, I think, gets into another good thing about the way that things have evolved, because the thing that you run into is, like I said, a lot of early religious groups seem to practice what they call animism, this idea that all things have a spirit. Yeah, I was having the same problem on actually, believe it or not, Source the Skeptics feed the other night at work because my internet connection was going wacky and it kept reposting things. So don't worry about it. I'm not blaming you. But so as we moved away from animism and towards polytheism, henotheism, and monotheism, and the other things, and it's a common arrogance. You'll see that in some anthropology, that it's an evolution, that we're improving and refining religion. I argue, and Christians will argue that it's a refinement of religions towards the one true religion of monotheism. I've seen atheists who would argue it's a refinement to the gradual true realization that all religion is nonsense and God does not exist. But I think much like actual evolution, the way that religions have evolved over time doesn't connotate superior or inferior. It's just the way people, that as society, if nothing else, as society changed and you went from very small tribal groups that interacted with each other periodically to civilizations and cities where large groups of people would settle together for long periods of time, you start to run into this need for organization. And are you going to worship the spirit of every stone, or are you going to worship every important mountain, or are you going to worship the god of the mountains? And just refocus in a way of thinking. That said, I think where you see animism survive well into even the modern day in some places is look at fairy lore. You'll find people, hardcore monotheists in parts of Europe today who believe there is only one God, who leave offerings of honey and bread out at night for the fairies of the fields or the fairies of the hearth. And is it a giant leap, logically speaking, to go from this idea that all living things have a spirit to there are dryads, which are the spirit of trees, or at least important trees. There are nymphs, the spirit of the water. Refined further to particularly important trees, sacred groves, sacred bodies of water have this spirit. And you see this with, there are wells devoted to specific saints. There are, these ideas continue even today. And from an anthropological perspective, if we take off our believer hat for a moment and just think about it critically, you could argue that this idea of fairies may be an anthropological outgrowth of our original belief that all things had a soul. Let's so as people get more civilized, magic, they start writing. Particularly as we start to develop a written language, people start to write things down. They start, they start to talk about the spirits. They start to, well, okay, there's, Babylon in particular, where a lot of this stuff starts to really get codified and given order. There are demons associated with disease, there are demons associated with natural disaster. They name these demons. They create rituals to cast them out. They create rituals that summon. That's the thing. Christians in particular have this idea that Babylon was a place of demon worship and that they summoned demons. They're not entirely wrong, but they're not exactly right either. The thing to realize about Babylonian deities in particular is that a lot of them aren't entirely bad or good. They're like a fair number of pagan deities. They're almost like superpowered humans. Let me give you an example of what I mean, because that maybe it's me, but that sounds like a weird way of putting it. Well, I'll even do a Babylonian demon many of you have probably heard of because of a couple of very famous movies in which he had a starring role. Pazuzu. The four-winged lotus sort of critter from the Exorcist films. What is Pazuzu? Is he a demon? In Babylonian culture, you could certainly make that argument. On the other hand, while he is a god of or demon or something of disease, people did call on him. I would hypothetically imagine some people called on him to try to cause people to, their enemies to be afflicted with disease. But people also called on him to protect their children. Because his wife was Lamashtu, who was a dark, malevolent goddess who particularly was known to threaten women during childbirth and to kidnap children while they were breastfeeding. She'd gnaw on their bones and suck their blood, and having a whole bunch of other negative things associated with her. But in fact, she's also the daughter of the sky god Anu. What makes her different, apparently, than a lot of the other demons in Mesopotamian cultures, a lot of the other ones do evil things because the gods tell them to. She just actually is outright malevolent. But again, Pazuzu is seen as a very negative figure, a bringer of famine and drought and disease. But he's also invoked for protection, particularly against his wife, against disease, and against Lamashtu. It's like I said, they sort of did worship demons, but it's not that simple. For that matter, look at when you look, and there's some truth to that to other pagan cultures. A lot of gods, and this is true of Judaism as well, like Christianity, have very human characteristics. Let's all talk about the philanderer in the room. Is there a piece of tail anywhere on Olympus or Earth that Zeus didn't try to hit? I mean, I saw a story of somebody talking about a mythology professor talking about Zeus, and Zeus, the god of the sky, the god of lightning, the god of thunder, the god of kings, the god of philanderers. I mean, if ever there was a god of cheating husbands, it was Zeus. A very human quality. A lot of the other Greek gods, a lot of the Norse gods, they act like humans with superhuman powers. For that matter, because they don't just want to pick on everybody else, the Bible describes Yahweh as a jealous God. Not like roundabout implications. It outright says he is a jealous God. 1 second. Exodus 22-6. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make unto yourself an idol, nor any image of anything that is in the heavens or heavens above, or that is in the earth beneath. There's in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, Yahweh, your God, am a jealous God, visiting iniquity on the fathers of the children unto the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, and showing loving kindness to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. This is a very human-like description of God, and this isn't, again, it's not interpretation. This is what the book of Exodus says. Exodus 22-6. Now, there's lots of philosophical arguments you can make there about people anthropomorphizing these gods. But again, in the context, they have this human quality, which leads to a whole other school of thought on the history of religion. And I think there's a degree of truth to this, that some figures that we now perceive as gods of the ancient world, that in fact were worshipped as gods of the ancient world, may at one time have been very real mortal kings or heroes or generals. There, for example, is a school of thought that one of the most famous stories in Babylon, let's face it, one of the few stories of Babylonian mythology that non-scholars today are likely to have heard of, the battle between Tiamat and Marduk. There's a school of thought that may actually be describing a war between two rival city-states that just got mythologized and turned into metaphor over thousands of years, hundreds to thousands of years. And now we think of it as a battle between this ancient primordial being of darkness, Tiamat, and the god Marduk. And while this is taking some interesting turns from the original topic, I want to point out again, folks, that I'm very proud to say that we actually have the ability to take calls again now. There's a phone number in the description. I'm not going to read it out on air again, mostly because you also need a PIN number, and you have to enter the PIN number to be able to join me. And I don't want to waste time reading both. The other thing to point out is, again, as time drags on and monotheism takes over, Christians didn't entirely reject the idea of gods. If you want to know, in the Middle Ages, what the average black magician, average person who summoned demons, the necromancers, the people who tried to talk to the dead, you want to know what most of them would have looked like? Hint, hint, they looked like priests because they were priests. By the time of the evolution of magic had gotten so codified and so organized, it was written down. If you're going, if you want, in Middle Ages, particularly if you want to summon a demon, you need a spell. You need very specific rituals. These rituals are probably very old. For example, there is a grimoire, the Key of Solomon, and there's an older grimoire called the Testament of Solomon, that purports to have been written by the Jewish king Solomon. That said, it's shaky whether or not he actually wrote a grimoire, although there is definitely a school of thought in both Jewish Kabbalah and in Islam that he, yes, it is too bad Virgo lost her voice, that Solomon did interact with spirits of some kind, possibly demons, possibly something else. That they use these formal rituals. And very specifically, you had to do very detailed, complex rituals that usually involved invocations to God and prayers to Jesus to keep your butt safe when you summoned up this demon. Which is also one of the reasons we know that the Key of Solomon was not written at all by Solomon or was heavily edited, is because it makes mention of Jesus, and Solomon's a little too far back to have known who Jesus was. Just sad. But you summoned them to do various things. But to do that, you had to be literate. Typically, you had to know how to read, write, and speak Latin. The average peasant didn't speak Latin, couldn't read anything, and certainly couldn't read Latin. Some of the nobility could, but they were usually a little busy doing all the other things that nobles did. The ones who were most educated, the most likely to be able to read the text in question, were priests. And we have records of this. If you want one of the weirdest mind screws in history, in my opinion, Pope Honorarius. He was obviously a Catholic Pope, Honorarius the First. This is a 6th century Pope. Or should be 7th century Pope. Let me make sure I've got the right one. Yes, the Grimoire of Pope Honorarius. It's a 17th or 18th century grimoire. Pope Honorarius III. It was 1150 to 1227. It was actually not only, like I said, historically, necromancers and black magicians were priests because they were the educated ones. This particular grimoire was explicitly written to be used by a priest. Some of the instructions include saying mass. And apparently, yeah, there's a 13th century book, the Sworn Book of Honorarius, that would probably be a little closer to the right one. But basically, supposedly, this Honorarius III guy got bored with honorary ordinary temptation, and he decided he wanted to see what Satan had to offer him, just to prove how pious he was. And he started summoning demons. He talks about the value of occult knowledge in the church and summoning demonic entities and learning how to control him. And this idea that it certainly did, in fact, exist in the 13th century church and 14th century church, that because by virtue of the fact that they were working for the purposes of God, priests had authorities. You could cast them out, but you could also summon them to get them to do things for you. You see this idea later. For example, there's a very famous case of supposed demonic possession. I'm skeptical, although I really need to do more research before I come. And I should do some more research so I could actually do an episode on it, called The Devils of Lagoon, that happened in Lagoon, France, where a whole convent was supposedly possessed and involved in bizarre satanic orgies and things of that nature. But after it, some of the women who were possessed weren't exorcised. They were sent out into Europe with exorcists as chaperones so that they could use the abilities they were given as people who were possessed by demons to peer into purgatory Because, well, the modern churches largely discarded the idea. There was this idea at the time that's, and this is worth, I think, clarifying as well, of this idea of purgatory. So, medieval church believed in three or four, depending on how you look at it, realms of the dead. There's heaven, purgatory, limbo, and hell. If you in Catholicism in the Middle Ages, if you were a Christian who died and had the last rites performed over you and were able to confess your sins, zoom to heaven. If you died with sins on your conscience that you hadn't been able to make amends for, if you hadn't been able to go to confession, if you hadn't atoned, but you're still Christian, and you still truly believed in Jesus Christ, and particularly they were venial sins as opposed to mortal sins, you went to purgatory. Purgatory is kind of what it sounds like in the tin. It's a place of purgation. Souls are there to purge the weight of the sins that they haven't released in life before they go to heaven. This is also a common misunderstanding. Souls in purgatory is heaven's waiting room. If you're in purgatory, you're eventually going to go to heaven. You can't accidentally trip and fall and go to hell. And just you have some stuff from your mortal life you still have to work out before you move to heaven. There's an idea among Catholics, and you even see this today, even though purgatory has fallen away as a Catholic doctrine, that what we think of as ghosts are actually people in purgatory. That these are souls of people that are waiting to work out their things so they can get to heaven. So I've seen a really neat video by a priest who suggested that, if you encounter a ghost, don't be afraid of them. Don't try and call an exorcist. Pray for that soul, because that soul needs to move on. And don't try to communicate with them either, because then you're starting to get into necromancy, which is a whole lot. He argues in general, I think he's overstates a little bit that it's basically that it's necromancy, but it's not. Ghosts are not, his point being, ghosts are not demons, which is certainly an idea in the Middle Ages. Then there's limbo, which I don't know as much about, but essentially seems sort of almost like hell's waiting room. But mostly limbo's a place where the unbaptized, particularly unbaptized children go, babies. They can't go to heaven because they weren't baptized, but they don't deserve hell because they were babies. Which, well, the church's idea of purgatory is, pun intended, still sort of in limbo. The idea of limbo is history. The church completely rejects the idea that infants will go to limbo or anywhere other than heaven just because they weren't baptized, and I absolutely agree with that. No, babies do not. Babies and young children who die go directly to go to heaven. They do not go to hell. They do not go to purgatory. They do not go to limbo. To be judged as anything other than worthy of heaven, you have to be capable of making a conscious choice to commit a wicked act. And before the age of self-awareness, there's debate about what that is. God is not holding you accountable for your actions. Then there's hell, which is for the truly unrepentant sinners, particularly people who've committed mortal sins, and for people who don't believe in Jesus. Though, again, particularly, you see it in Dante, but it's actually in the Bible as well. Just that the Bible is less detailed than Dante, that each is basically rewarded or punished according to their works. So even in hell, there is a sliding scale of torment, torture. Particularly, I always found interesting of the first level of hell, which is also limbo in his depiction, was basic that the souls of people of the virtuous pagans, people who were good, honorable people who didn't believe in Jesus, particularly the ones who died before Jesus was ever born, because how could Aristotle or Plato have believed in somebody who didn't exist at the time, or didn't walk the earth at the time? Obviously, in Christian theology, Jesus is eternal. But basically, not tortured. They're kind of just left to their own devices. It's not heaven, but it's not. But as hell goes, it's not so bad. And then again, people who get actual torture, the worse the sin, the greater the torture. Well, there's quite a lot more I could say. We've got an hour. I think this is a pretty good time to call it a night. I want to thank Teresa for sticking with me. Oh, and Paul Nightwolf. Okay then, Paul. That's not my thing, but hey, I'm not one to judge. If you enjoy burying yourself naked in the dirt in your garden and pretending you're a carrot, more power to you. As always, this channel's tradition. Although I have to say, Paul, Pixar didn't happen. Just for God's sakes, if you're going to take the pics, wait until after you've covered the necessary bits up with the dirt. I'm just not into guys, and but I want to thank everybody for listening, and I want to thank Teresa and Paul, because honestly, Paul, thank you. You gave me a nice, good chuckle with that one. Although I need some brain bleach to scrub the image out of my head. That's going to wrap it up for tonight, though. Make sure to tune in next week. We will have another show. Sadly, no one was able to call in this week. I do plan, but the feature doesn't cost me anything, and I really like this new way of streaming the show better. So I'm going to stick with it, and we'll have it available next week. That's going to do it for tonight. Again, remember to tune next week. If you didn't join us last week for Wrath of Khan, I highly recommend you look up the Wrath of Khan YouTube channel here on YouTube. All the videos we did are available. It is really awesome. Oh, hi, Patsy Trey. Is there a question you had or anything? I mean, I don't have anything pressing. If anybody has any questions or comments or concerns, I can certainly stay on for a little longer before I completely wrap up. But yeah, seriously, Wrath of Khan was an enormous amount of fun. I'm really proud to have been part of it. Go listen to Dacre Stoker tell a story that Bram Stoker's mother told him that Dacre believes, and I think he's right, was part of the inspiration for Dracula. Watch my friend, game designer and artist Alex Strang draw yokai. Sadly, this is one of the disadvantages of the fact it's recording. When he did the yokai live last week, we actually made some suggestions, and he drew ones. He drew the creature that lives inside of women's purses. That's why women can never find anything in their purse, for example. Or the creature who demagnetizes credit card strips. It was a lot of fun. And there was a really, really good video on Sunday where Patrick Thomas, John French, Baron Voltage, Brian McKinley, and myself all had a nice chat about vampires and other such things. Patsy Trigg asks, have you ever heard that the Catholics didn't believe in reincarnations at one point? I've heard that before, not usually specifically about the Roman Catholic Church. Usually it's said of first century Christians, which is a little before anything as formal as Catholicism began, since I would argue, well, Catholicism and Orthodoxy obviously are rooted in the first and second centuries. They really form more like in the 4th century with the Council of Nicaea. See, when the churches organize and start to agree on a single doctrine. But yes, I have heard that early Christians did believe in reincarnation. I haven't seen any good. I haven't researched it extensively, to be completely honest with you, so I don't know how certain it is, although I've heard it from a number of people that I respect and would consider credible. Yeah, that was a really cool story from Bram's mom. Personally, I do not believe in reincarnation, but let me put a proviso on that. I don't believe in reincarnation because my experiences have always led me to the conclusion that we have one life. I've never had past life memories. I've rarely, if ever, experienced deja vu. And for that matter, I've spent years encountering spirits of the dead. That said, since I, to my knowledge, have never died before, I could, of course, be wrong because reincarnation. I can't say for certain. And I am very willing to admit the possibility that I am wrong. It is difficult, but not impossible, to factor an idea of reincarnation into even biblical Christianity. I mean, yes, the Bible says that we are given to die but once and then face judgment, but there's way. I mean, I suppose you can make an argument there that it's just, but your reincarnation, you're a different person, and that new person is judged. I don't know. Certainly, reincarnation would provide an answer to a problem I, like many Christians, have with this idea that if you don't believe in God the right way, you're going to be tortured horribly forever. Which actually, for that matter, I reject in general. But for that matter, I find it difficult to accept there's any crime a human can commit that warrants eternal torture. And giving souls that are the damned who've been down there long enough a second chance, in the sense of reincarnation, is certainly appealing to me. All of which I will freely admit is an emotional response. It is not necessarily a scriptural response. There's a degree of logic to it insofar as I believe, I think there's a point to be made of, if God is all loving, how can he leave people to be tortured horribly for all of eternity? And yes, I think it would explain a lot. I think it's possible. I will say, Patsy, I would suggest anyone else who has an interest in reincarnation, if you dig back through the channel 5 or so years ago, so right near when I first got started. In fact, as I think of it, the very first guest I ever had on was a gentleman by the name of Robert Snow. Robert Snow is very interesting for several reasons. One of which is that he's a retired police homicide captain. The other of which is that he wrote a book, Confessions of a Past Life Skeptic, and he talked about it when I had him on the show. An account of reincarnation that seems incredibly credible. It is very hard to explain, not impossible, but very hard to explain without either concluding that he actually is an example of reincarnation, or that he respected homicide police captain torpedoed his own promising career in law enforcement to make up a story about being the reincarnation of an obscure 19th century painter. I'm not inclined to think he's lying, and I honestly don't have a good explanation for it except his own. I would highly recommend watching the video, and for that matter, reading his book, Confessions of a Past Life Skeptic. He is an excellent human being, and he has a very good story to tell. I hope that covers your question pretty well. So I'm going to wrap this up here, folks. I want to thank you all for listening. Thank you to my friends who have joined me in chat. It's always nice to have some live souls in there to know that somebody is listening to me. And thank you for going back and watching it. I appreciate that. But that's going to do it for tonight. Remember to tune in next week. And again, Wrath of Khan here on YouTube. Watch the videos. They're an enormous amount of fun. They're going to stay up and they're going to stay free so that you guys can check them out and enjoy them. That was the main purpose of the convention, but I'll say it now. If you have some money to spare, consider donating it to me. The Patreon link's in the description below, which is patreon.com/demonology. If you would rather donate it to a more worthy cause, and I don't blame you, you might also consider donating to Save the Children, which is a charity that does a lot of work, and in particular has done a lot of work to help kids who are currently suffering under this corona epidemic. And there are plenty of other wonderful charities out there. I always recommend people, help other people, help as much as you can in whatever way you can. And if you don't have money, trust me, I get it. But you can still reach out. If you don't have the money and you still want to help out, I recommend reaching out to your friends, your family, people your coworkers, people you know, and making sure everybody's okay and just checking in with them, because I can do a lot of good too. If you want to help the channel out and you're broke, remember you can always like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends. If you don't like what I'm doing, feel free to thumb me down and tell me what an idiot you think I am too, because that's always welcome too. And remember, the show is 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Saturday. We are now officially going to have it open, with possible exceptions based on what's going on in a week, but we will be starting to open it up to having calls, since I can do that with this wonderful new program. But that's going to do it for tonight, folks. I want to say to everybody, have a good night, have a great week, and God bless.